I often think about this when I'm when I look at spiders, because they just sit there. They just do nothing, right? Like their baseline activity is supposed to be inactivity. And they're just meant to wait until there's a time when something hits the web and suddenly there's this like burst of activity. And I guess that maybe like a spider's inner experience, if you can speculate about that, is something like an extreme state of depression or lethargy, followed by like random spikes of mania when the web kind of gets wobbled. Um, yeah, I mean I it just really it really makes sense that, you know, when you're ill, you shouldn't be doing anything because you should be saving calories. I'm Adam Hunt, and this is the Evolving Psychiatry podcast, rethinking mental health through an evolutionary lens. Share it with people who matter, like it if you like it, subscribe if you want to hear more. So feelings of depression are probably something that everyone will have, although not everyone will end up going into an episode of major depression. And depending on where you draw the line, maybe it's 10% of people will experience that, maybe it's 5%. Sometimes some people kind of claim it's more like 30% or 50% of people will experience an episode of major depression. But I think probably most people will experience the feelings of depression that don't persist quite as long or as severely as may qualify a major depressive episode. But it is obviously clear that this is one of the most common mental disorders. It's obviously one of the ones which is most treated, and it's also one of the ones which has been most hypothesized about in the evolutionary literature. But if you read the literature, most of the kind of publications on evolutionary hypotheses of depression are reviewing the various different perspectives, and there doesn't seem to be that much consensus. However, in the last like 6 months to a year, I think that actually there is one sort of overarching hypothesis which can capture many of the existing hypotheses and give us a pretty good sort of simple answer as to what is depression for. Why do we have depression? Why do we evolve to experience depression? And yeah, this is a really interesting and kind of nice, simple, overarching explanation. So I just thought I'd share it with you. It's not that easy to find anyone else publishing on this in the existing literature, or they would say that maybe Daniel Nettle most inspired me to kind of think through this lens. And the lens is basically that depression is about disengaging from life, not doing anything. Basically, there's times when you just shouldn't act. You shouldn't feel motivated to act. You shouldn't waste energy acting. You should just lay out, do nothing. And this seems sort of obvious in many of the symptoms of depression, which are kind of tiredness, fatigue, lack of emotion, lack of motivation. And I think that, like, even though it seems very obvious to me now, I think through this lens of depression as kind of disengaging, it seems very obvious that that's what depressed people do, is they just disengage. But I guess I hadn't kind of fully realized how important and useful it was to disengage before kind of properly thinking through this lens. And I also think that this kind of disengagement perspective can actually be a really good kind of overarching explanation for the other more specific hypotheses of where depression is useful. So for instance, you have this sort of like social rank, social conflict hypothesis, which is that in competition, in times of being bullied, in kind of aggressive encounters, there's all sorts of times when you might meet an individual, and I'm saying individual because animals also do this. It's not just humans. You meet something that bullies you or that beats you, And it's better just to disengage from that interaction. If you're being bullied at work, probably it's just better to disengage. If you're being bullied in a hunter-gatherer tribe, probably just disengage. And this is kind of partly a protective thing. This is often talked about, especially in the animal literature, as being protective. So John Price, one of the early kind of fathers of evolutionary psychiatry, talked about this in terms of like the pecking order in chickens and how chickens will learn when they should peck the food because at some point they've been attacked by a more dominant or large or aggressive chicken, and now they're protecting themselves by waiting for that chicken to have the food first. And you can see why this is like a protective behavior. Just if you have an individual that's being aggressive to you, then you should not engage with them, protect yourself, wait. And so this is one of the kind of specific hypotheses for aggression, but obviously this doesn't account for times of, romantic loss. And so yeah, it didn't really kind of fit. And then also you have these other times when you're kind of maybe you're not being recognized for your value by your parents, and these are the sorts of cases which Ed Hagen talks about quite a lot. And this sort of doesn't really fit this social rank theory. But I do think that the idea that like depression as a set of behaviors is just there to kind of disengage you from life does fit a lot of the circumstances, and the general usefulness of not doing anything is perhaps something that we overlook as a kind of very action-oriented, individualistic society where pretty much all the time, if you want to make your life better, you have to make the decision to make your life better. You have to quit your job and find another job. You have to go out there and find another partner. You have to leave home. These are all times when to get out of this tough situation which makes you depressed, the best thing to do is to like act, get out of that terrible relationship, get out of that department where you're being bullied. So it seems it's very unintuitive to us, and I think that the function of depression is perhaps more mismatched than almost any other kind of emotional function, and maybe that's why of all of the emotions we are diagnosing this one as a disorder most clearly, because disengagement is just so bad. Non-activity, just waiting it out, is probably almost not going to work. I mean, it does sort of work now. People do often, times do change is the key here, right? Like times change without you doing anything. So often, if you're being bullied at work by a certain person, then in 3 months, they might have just moved on, either to bully someone else or to a different department, or whatever. Someone else has raised an issue with them and they've like had to change their behavior, not because of anything that you've done, but because of something that someone else has done. All sorts of reasons why waiting does actually just, life gets better. If you're depressed after losing a relationship, then, in 3 to 6 months, maybe you've just found someone. And you didn't really have to do that much, maybe. But although obviously here we come back to the rub of modernity, meaning that you really probably did have to do something. So yeah, the kind of the various symptoms of depression, the sort of both the physiological and the psychological symptoms do seem to just cause people to do less, right? To not waste energy. But it's not just about wasting energy. It's about like, just doing nothing. And I think this has been a really useful lens for me to kind of think about all of these different behaviors. And it's perhaps useful to kind of note quite how mismatched and weird it is that in modernity, when you do nothing, not that many other people suffer. So the weird thing is that you being depressed is basically only bad for you. Okay, maybe if you're a parent, then it's bad for your children or it's bad for your partner. So there are people who might care, but actually it's not anywhere near as bad as it would have been for millions of years when you were meant to be cooperating and basically helping other people survive. So hunter-gatherer life is just waking up in this cluster of families and you're all helping each other survive every day. You've got children to care for, you've got food to gather. Life is just these 30 people just as a team, fighting against nature, against starvation, against illness, against the weather. And at that point, like being part of this cooperative, collaborative team is super important. And people really need you. And this is kind of blending into kind of Ed Hagen's idea. And this is why I quite like the disengaging function and idea as kind of as encapsulating many of the different hypotheses of depression, which I think can be kind of nicely joined under this idea of just disengaging. Because so Ed Hagen talks about, and Kristen Syme talks about how depressive behaviors are sort of bargaining behaviors to your community, that they're a signal that something is wrong in your life, they're a cry for help. And the reason that they work is because they take you out of the cooperative equation. You're not supporting anyone anymore. In fact, you're kind of threatening to the person, sometimes to your family, that actually you're not going to be here at all in the future. If you engage in suicidal behaviors, you're threatening that you're not going to be able to collaborate and support and basically help other people survive. So clearly, that's like an extreme form of saying that I want to disengage from life. But even a sort of milder case of depression, one of the examples I've heard from an anthropologist friend is a woman who got depressed because her husband ran off with another woman. And it became immediately obvious after the first day or two, everyone is just panicking because she's got 5 children running around and everyone else is now having to feed them. Previously, she was getting up every day and helping feed everyone else's children, helping care for them. And now you're having to support her children and she's not helping you. Huge cost, like something that was reacted to in this anecdote that I've heard. Within a couple of days, people have gone to find the husband who's run off with another woman, brought him back. They've gone through a ritual to say, oh no, the soul sickness, which was kind of recognized as not being true sickness. You know, the reason she wasn't getting out of bed was clearly not because of illness, but people kind of work out, well, this is, you know, this has happened to her in her life and we need to act now. She obviously reacted in this depressed way because her husband's gone and she can't care for the children by herself. So this is a very clear case where disengaging could be so useful if you're living in this super engaging and kind of collaborative team where people rely on you. But now, if you disengage, if you get depressed, like, yeah, is it costly to the people around you? Sort of, maybe. The people at your job, depending on what your job is, they do care. But I mean, on the one hand, there's not that much that they can do maybe to change your situation if you're being bullied. I mean, maybe if you expressed it, then it would be, yeah, they could raise it to HR and you go through this messy process, but then who wants to do that? Clearly, like, if you do just stop doing your job, then yeah, I mean, there's like one less person filling in the spreadsheets or doing the emails or whatever. But it's not life or death in the same way that disengaging as a hunter-gatherer, as a kind of community member, was really life or death. I've talked to an anthropologist who said that, you know, schizophrenic symptoms are probably better than depressive symptoms in a tribe. You can have hallucinations, doesn't matter. So what? So long as you're okay, and you're kind of working and just getting along with everyone, who cares? You can be hearing a few voices, fine. If you're depressed and just lying there, and people are having to kind of feed you because obviously that, you know, you're part of the community, you have to be fed, but you're also not doing anything to help. This is like panic mode. This is terrible. So the key here is that, like, this disengaging was such a clear social signal in a world without walls, without doors. you're just in a community and everyone's waking up in the morning, but suddenly they're kind of looking around and they're like, oh, why isn't Adam around? Like, what's happened? And I'm lying there in my hut and I just can't move. And I'm like, I don't feel like it. And I clearly am, I'm just like severely depressed and not acting. Obviously, even in a medium level, even if you're not like completely catatonic in bed, if I'm just a bit less active around the camp and I'm kind of looking a bit weary and like, oh yeah, God, I do have to go hunting. Okay, that's worrying in itself, right? Because like I need to go hunting to catch some food to feed everyone. So even starting to express that low mood before it gets to an extreme depressive episode is going to elicit something. And this is perhaps the sort of depression that we do see, especially amongst our friend groups. If people kind of express this, then we do kind of feel for them, and we do try and encourage them. Hopefully we do. But it's less apparent to us that this person, it's less necessary to us that this person needs to work and needs to be kind of high energy. The cool thing about this, like encapsulating depression, is disengaging framework, is it's also useful for understanding stuff like seasonal affective disorder or depressive behaviors when you're sick. So, hey, when it's dark outside and cold and there's no food, what should you do? You shouldn't act. You shouldn't like get up and be really active around like trying to find food. You should basically just lie there. Like the intuition that or the idea that we are like meant to be super active creatures is just silly. I often think about this when I'm when I look at spiders. Because they just sit there, they just do nothing, right? Like their baseline activity is supposed to be inactivity, and they're just meant to wait until there's a time when something hits the web, and suddenly there's this like burst of activity. And I guess that maybe like a spider's inner experience, if you can speculate about that, is something like an extreme state of depression or lethargy, followed by like random spikes of mania when the web kind of gets wobbled. Yeah, I mean it just really makes sense that, you know, when you're ill, you shouldn't be doing anything because you should be saving calories. When you're in these aggressive encounters, you shouldn't be doing anything because it kind of protects you from actually, you know, things getting worse or someone actually bullying you, or severely hurting you. It's so yeah, this is something that I historically have never done research into depression. Really, I'm more interested in individual differences, but definitely kind of listening to Daniel Nestelus and also others talk about depression in the last kind of 6 months to a year has made me think, well, this is the good overarching strong kind of evolutionary hypothesis that I think is actually quite defensible, and it's not really out there well articulated in the literature at the moment. Maybe I'll do it myself at some point, but I just thought I would share that. And also I think that there's an interesting insight here in just how mismatched it is. Like, I think of all of the emotions, disengaging is the one that we really don't need to do anymore. And people talk about depression as the sort of over-medicalized disorder that, you know, everyone gets depressed, and kind of clearly everyone knows that there's something sort of functional and reactive here. Like, it's probably one of the traits, at least, that is most considered to like, oh, it must have some evolutionary function. It's so common. It affects us in such kind of predictable circumstances of, you know, basically losing things, going through tough times, having stressful life experiences. But I think that kind of intuition is obviously there, but I hadn't heard it properly kind of articulated in such a clear way as old knows, because disengaging from life could be really useful. But yeah, it's just not that useful anymore. I do think that there's an argument to be made that of all of the emotions we have, this disengagement is really just bad, right? And you are not, most of the time, it depends, but a lot of the time, you're just waiting around and disengaging. Firstly, is not going to elicit the social support that it once did. Secondly, the times probably aren't going to change that much. It's not like hunter-gatherer life where everyone's kind of on the move all the time and social groups are changing quite flexibly and the seasons matter a lot to whether or not you should be getting up and finding food. We live in this very weird world where most of the time you have to change your own life. And disengaging from that and like lacking the energy to be able to act to change your life in the way that you need to change your life is, I think, probably one of the reasons that depression potentially is like the worst kind of the least functional emotion now, and is sort of maybe causing itself to perpetuate and get into extremely bad persistent states which were probably never ancestrally visible at all. uh, it will basically be impossible for someone to spend 6 months depressed, or even 2 weeks kind of really depressed. Like, you wouldn't, yeah, help you have to constantly be moving with the group. um so so then you get into this world of like, well, what do we do? Should we be treating this with SSRIs? I mean, I think if SSRIs really, really definitely worked, then I think there'd be a good argument for using them. I think the best arguments against using SSRIs is questions over how effective they actually are. But it does seem like, people who are entering depressed states need some intervention that we are currently very badly suited to kind of respond to as a society. We are just not providing the correct social or psychological or chemical response. Perhaps we're not doing quickly enough. We're not providing it through, well, because we don't actually recognize it that much often. Like, we're just not living around people enough to see when they're getting depressed. We don't care enough when they do get depressed. We don't feel like this is a threat to our lives because we really need this person to survive. So there's all sorts of things going on with this, like these depressive emotions and states, which are, yeah, clearly not suitable for modernity, and obviously do require some kind of response. So one of the things that has been kind of talked about, I know Daniel Nettle talks about this a bit, is like that social deprivation causes a lot of depression. And yeah, maybe there's like a public health solution here, right? Maybe there's a way you can reconfigure society to make it less depressogenic. Maybe, if one of the reasons that you would feel depressed is because you experience yourself as having lost status or being kind of low rank, and this is quite deeply seated and sort of observed across the animal kingdom, implying it's, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of years old, then yeah, like this kind of deep response to social inequality, say, might just be massively overactivated by modernity, where there is clearly huge disparity in wealth, despite even the kind of least wealthy amongst us living somewhat more comfortable lives in various dimensions than our hunter-gatherer ancestors did, definitely in terms of medicine and food and water and warmth, which most people, thankfully, have some access to, reasonable access to, actually more than most hunter-gatherers, as I say. But maybe just that inequality kind of sets off a depressive reaction. What do you do about that? Can you actually reduce inequality to the extent that you're not going to cause any depression? I don't know. I think that's really hard. That's a hard question. Are you going to reduce bullying completely? Yeah, maybe, but it's difficult. I mean, you're not going to stop people kind of breaking up relationships. It does seem like, the fact that so many circumstances elicit depressive behaviors means that we shouldn't expect to kind of prevent them entirely. This is just a sort of natural reaction to life. It's an emotion that, will probably never leave us. The problem or the solution might be more about responding to it more effectively. Realizing that to get the person to engage again, you need to kind of tick some boxes in their life. You need to show them that they do have social worth, that they are appreciated. You need to give them some freedom. You need to give them the ability to get out of that situation where they're being bullied. You need to encourage them to, in a way that perhaps we don't if we just kind of give someone a pill and then send them back to the home where they are being abused, or send them back to the office where they're, feeling left out or bullied. Yeah, the reaction is, our reaction probably could be better if we had this idea of what people need to kind of, or what they're lacking, which causes the depressive state originally. But stronger community would be good. Yes. Yeah, I haven't thought too much about like the exact public health consequences and exactly what you do with treatment. But what I do think is that this general paradigm of understanding these behaviors as disengaging is like a really nice, simple overview that, as I say, captures the various different environmental factors which we do know associate with depression. And yes, it's made it much clearer to me to understand what depression is for. But it's also really highlighted that this is perhaps the emotion that we do need to kind of treat the most or think most carefully about, because modernity does require engaging, not disengaging. Disengaging is not that useful anymore, and fighting against it and encouraging us to engage because it's worthwhile to engage, because we really need to make our lives better, is probably the right way to go. So yes, I hope that this has been interesting and has helped you kind of think about these emotions and this particularly severe and debilitating emotional state, which undoubtedly gets into extremely dysfunctional modes nowadays. Yeah, thank you for listening. The Evolving Psychiatry podcast is financially supported by the Human Ecology Group of the Institute of Evolutionary Medicine at the University of Zurich.